Afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me okay. Looking forward to today's show. Got a good friend of mine who's just swanned in at like 30 seconds to go because she's just casual superstar like that. And so I'm really looking forward to catching up with Liz on air. She's got a new blog out we're going to talk all about, and some of the things she's been reflecting on there. We had a really interesting week. So thank you so much for those of you who've been giving feedback as we've been going. Rob Tyre, who else has been on the show this week? Hannah Morley, some really interesting stuff, especially in and around sort of interpretation and application of evidence. So it's nice to have a bit of a change of pace today and have a bit of fun on Friday. Thanks for joining. If you're tuning in live, make sure you get in touch on the comments section, and certainly as interactive as we can would be brilliant. So without further ado, actually, I've just noticed, this is what's interesting. Look, I've got this, they've just come up with these little Christmas frame things. These are cute, aren't they? Look. Yeah, I think we'll stick with this one for now. Right, let's get Liz on the show. Liz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
You can, yeah. It looks like my screen's frozen a little bit, but I can hear you okay. No, there you are. That's fine. All good. So yeah, thanks for joining me, mate. We've been overdue a catch up, but we probably didn't intend to do it all on air. So let's.
Sorry, we've just got another guest come on. The dog's just decided to come and sit on my knee. So, but right.
She'll make sense. She'll make more sense than the both of us. So that's fine. Tell me a little bit about what you've. Because we've it's been a bit of a funny year in many ways, but then you've sort of burst back on the scene a little bit, onto my radar at least, with this new blog, Girls Who Climb Trees. What's tell me about it, but also what inspired it.
So this was an idea that I had quite a while ago, actually, and it was a little bit around an experience that I'd kind of had at work, and I guess in the general physio world, around just feeling, I don't know whether it's an age thing as well, of just being a bit more aware of kind of gender discrimination, and again, not like I say on the website, it's not that it's particularly overt or that I feel I've missed out on opportunities, but just this kind of awareness that there's this, I guess, kind of subtle kind of gender discrimination that's going on, and partly that, and then I kind of parked it for a long time, and then as I talk about in my blog, a relationship of mine recently ended, and it's kind of pushed me to explore some different avenues, and you know, the blog's nothing really to do with the relationship. It was just more, I need something to kind of put my energies into, and I decided to revive this idea of the Girls Who Climb Trees thing, and partly as well, my partner had as a teenage daughter, and kind of getting to know her and some experience around that, again, kind of just made me aware of how there's still these kind of differences in society. So it kind of pushed me to start writing again, and it's kind of become a bit of a monologue and a bit of a reflection, really, on lots of different things. So I'm not really sure where it's going or what I'm doing with it. But what's been really interesting is the amount of feedback I've had in terms of people that have identified with some of the things that I've written about, around kind of having a voice or finding your feet, or so kind of lots of really great feedback from women friends, but also friends of friends, and just random people on the internet. That some of the feedback I've had has been, quite interesting and quite validating, really.
Good. Well, one of the things that you really have led with it, and even in the title, it's sort of hinting in this direction, is that you've always been frustrated to ever be pigeonholed or discriminated against into a stereotype. And so you were saying that classically the language, and you sort of reflect on this being somewhat dated these days, but sort of being a tomboy, being someone that was otherwise not prim and proper and prissy, and instead were getting stuck in, and sometimes then it automatically became being one of the boys, rather than being, well, no, why is that not within the scope of a female identity? That's been something you've reflected quite a lot on. Is that something that then, because me knowing you as a character, that's just sort of central to you. It's not a new emergent thing that I've decided to take up tree climbing. So what is it about now that sort of meant that you felt that you wanted to speak about that rather than it just being part of you?
I'm not sure, really. I guess I feel like I'm at a bit of a crossroads in my life at the moment, and I kind of took on a new job this year, and I mean, I work in pain management, so I work with very, very complex pain patients, and I guess the more I get into that, the more what I'm realizing is how we deal with these problems and how we address these problems is really relevant to kind of lots of things in life. So we deal with pain very much as we talk about it as being a struggle, and I think that's really made me start to reflect on some of my own struggles. So we work very much from what we call an acceptance commitment therapy kind of model, and that's taught me a huge amount, and I guess really started to make me reflect on my own journey and my own struggles, and made me really aware of a lot of things. And I think it's also kind of dealing with these, you know, like very, very people with very complex problems and how they open up and how they've shared their stories. It's, I guess, made me share my story a little bit more, and made me be a little bit more open and a lot more open to being vulnerable, which is something that I've really struggled with a lot over the years, like this, because I have built up this persona of being this character and being kind of prided myself on being quite strong. But actually there's a real strength in vulnerability, and this is something kind of in my 40s I'm almost learning to open up to as well. And I talk as well in the blog about how, like, when my relationship ended, how I decided to get some counselling, which has been just incredible. You know, it's just been quite an incredible journey these last couple of months. And again, that's something I might not have done had I not been working with psychologists, and had I not seen the real benefit of you know, how that can really work. So yeah, lots of different things really. So my experience as a physio, but it's certainly my job now feels like it's going very much beyond what we traditionally know as physios.
Certainly, yeah. Well, that's it. It's broadening scope, isn't it? In that new space. One of the things that I want to just touch on is because we often, because we work in a what is a female dominant profession, and then you've got me and Joe Turner have not just spoken about vulnerability, interestingly, but also spoken about some of the caricatures and stereotypes that sort of self-select into physiotherapy. It means that there are some, you know, regardless of gender, you've got this stereotype that comes of us being Mr. and Mrs. Motivator and things like that, and sometimes that positivity bias that sometimes then skews it. I wondered, because you were mentioning about sort of when you're mentioning gender discrimination and writing about it, you are often talking about this pigeonhole into stereotypes of say, classic femininity, pinks and blues type situation. Is it your take that is being fueled by the masses and by everyone, or is that actually something that being discrimination or stereotyping by men to women to be more feminine?
I think, do you know what? I just don't think it's as simple as it being a male female thing. I think this is the problem. I think that, and I talk about this in one of my blogs, in that I think it is really easy to kind of pigeonhole people. And I think what my experience was it does become very much this male thing. And I think there are many men who feel pigeonholed or marginalized because they don't fit that typical male stereotype. And it's funny because years ago I remember kind of almost mourning a little bit and saying we need more men in the profession, because, you know, women often have children and go part-time, and that's not been my path. But we often we kind of, that's my mum coming in, so yeah, we often yeah, thanks mum, lost my train of thought. So I always said, you know, we need more men in the profession because they're probably a bit more likely to kind of be able to push things forwards in that they've got that time, and maybe we need that for a bit more career development. But then when I found that it did almost start to become male dominated, I found it became quite an aggressive and a bit more of an exclusive place somehow. Present company accepts, you know, it's not. So I think it's really complex. I don't think it's, I've come across men that are really empathetic and very kind of caring, and we're in a very caring profession. And I come across men who are very ego, you know, kind of ego driven, and the same with women. And I think the danger is we start to say it is an us versus them thing. And I think that's a really often dangerous place to be. I think it's about I think certain characteristics do tend to be associated more with men. And I think almost we need to redress the balance by saying, do you know what? We need our girls to be a bit more confident and maybe a bit more ego driven, but we need maybe our men to be a little bit more empathetic and be a little bit softer and actually, maybe be a bit more vulnerable or not be quite so ego driven, and try and kind of learn from each other rather than it be this like one or the other, us against them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking, and your blogs really helped me to reflect on this, at least again, I feel like I was revisiting some of it, but there were definitely some new bits in there where it's about trying to make sure that there's a range of 101 different ways to be a man, 101 ways to be a woman, and that the overlap is more significant than the extremes, but also trying to make sure that we don't, on analysis, succumb to some of the stereotypes that we're talking about, whereby as if to suggest that men are out for themselves, women are all just nothing but compassion for kumbaya and teamship, whereas we know that the ways in which men and women might stereotypically or classically display, say, aggression or competition is going to be different, but we still know it's there. I suppose I wonder, when you're talking about, say, interprofessionally, what I wondered is, because I remember that, and I wasn't ever going to use it as a gotcha on you, because you'd said, I remember you saying to me, you felt like, actually, I'm pleased that you and other blokes are stepping up, and what you were getting at with me, at least, was you were sort of saying that you were pleased to see me being a bit assertive and being bold enough to sort of push against the status quo, and admittedly, that is somewhat of a symbolically masculine thing for me to have done. However, I'm there, stood on the shoulders at least, or stood alongside many strong women, yourself included. So it was something that was interesting, because I'd never thought of it that way until you, and admittedly some other women had said it. However, done badly, I can understand that to its nth degree becomes then just it becomes something that's just too confrontational, and it sort of overindulges that assertion. And I'm not trying to get you to counsel me here as to whether we got that right or wrong, but I'm definitely interested in whether or not you feel that balance can be found, or whether we're always going to end up with this tug of war where we get it wrong sometimes, and that ends up just needing to be par for the course.
Who knows on that? I think the danger is in the past is that we talk about equality, and I think to try and get equality, women have traditionally almost had to or have behaved like men, and so, or behaved in a particular way, I guess, rather than it being a male-female thing. And I think it's about us all being able to stand and I guess champion different qualities. Now, will we always have that push-pull? Who knows? I mean, society's changing an awful lot. I don't think it's necessarily changing enough. But I think it comes down to recognizing what the problems are in order for us to be able to move forward. So again, like when workplaces often talk about equality, they'll talk about the pay gap, or they'll talk about women we've had so many women in senior positions. And it's like, well, yeah, that's all well and good, but if those women in senior positions are behaving in that very kind of aggressive, ego-driven way, then we're achieving nothing, So it's about being able to push certain qualities forwards. Now, and I had this discussion again with somebody in the workplace where they said, well, maybe we almost need some of those qualities in order to be able to push things forwards. And I kind of disagree, really, in that I think, again, it's this idea we're only ever going to push some things forwards if we're kind of aggressive and ego-driven. And I think sometimes, actually, you'll push things forwards a certain degree, but then we'll just end up backtracking because it's maybe not been thought out enough. It's maybe been pushed too much. So I think it's about really recognizing that you're right. There's a 1,001 different ways to, and it's about recognizing qualities in individuals and people and being able to work together and about that respect. The problem is because it's this, when we're talking about ego driven and I had this comment from a male colleague where I was told, well, I don't think there's a problem. There isn't a problem here. And it's like, but you wouldn't think there's a problem because you're seeing it from the inside out. And that's the danger, is when you've got a very dominant kind of personality type that's driving things, it often doesn't give space and doesn't give room for some of those other qualities, if that makes sense.
Well, that's the thing. I think framing it in personality, and that's the thing that's difficult. And we use sort of personality aspect scales and things sometimes, even within sort of allowing it to inform aspects of role and stuff within our teams. But again, you don't want to make sure, you don't want to suddenly succumb to stereotype on that either. And so, what I want to admit to you, though, that I have got a bit of a red line on these sorts of things, whereby when we sort of try and when we talk of equality, and especially for me, I often prefer the term fairness, in part because the assertion that men and women are in some ways relevantly different as a biological entity is something that then even that can sometimes be taboo. Now, does that mean we should then that's deterministic and that we would then have to comply within that as if it's inevitable? Of course, I'm not that way out. It'd be hilarious for me to be so. From a family of engineers, most of which female, I've gone into a care profession and motivated an irritating amount by empathy and compassion. But it's more that I do admit that I've noticed that this argument, taken far further than you are, and this is why, you know, as a friend and also someone who I'm enjoying reading your work, it's kind of that I don't see you doing this, but taking it further, it's just an aspiration to feminize men, an association to that anything assertive or to put your head above a parapet is simply led by ego, chest beating, and an aspiration to be some sort of alpha. And whilst as again, I'm not suggesting you're doing it, but that mistake being made is often a product of an analysis that suggests that we're just, you know, we're humans on parity. There's no relevant differences. We can't understand as to why behaviorally some men might be at the extremes of a spectrum that you don't get as much overlap on. And I suppose that's why I wanted to make sure I wasn't danced around it and not sharing that with you. I know we have spoken about that privately as well, so it's not news on it.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think this is the danger, but I think it comes down to what we value in society. So we really value, you know, success, and success is deemed to be a good job and generally a high-paying job. So that's where our society kind of sees success. But and so we tend to devalue, and I made a comment in one of my blogs really purposely to say that, you know, these women are important, whether they're, you know, they're changing the world or whether they're homemaking or making history, I think was the comment. And I kind of and this was a chat with a male friend of mine that we had, where he kind of said, why don't we value women bringing up children more? Like, you know, this idea of staying at home mum, I mean, look at what Charlotte's doing at the moment, you know, is in no way less valuable, you know, and particularly bringing up two boys. It's such an important job, yet we don't seem to. And I have so many, what do you do for a living? You know, when I often assess patients, do you work? Or I'm just a stay-at-home mum. The amount of times I hear that, and so I think it's about, I think we should be able to put our head above the parapet, whether male or female. I think we are different, and I think we need to acknowledge that. And that's my issue with this idea of equality. I think equality in the past has been seen as being the same, but being equal doesn't mean that we have to be the same.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a really interesting point, because equality based on, of course, equal rights is an appropriate and associated human right. But as soon as you try and make equality an equality of statistical outcome, as if to suggest that if we don't have, you know, we've not made progress until we've as many female plumbers as we have male plumbers, as many male nurses as we have female nurses, be a measure of success in of itself. I mean, it could well be that way, but I'm just as if to suggest that those statistics are the thing that matter, rather than the health of sort of culture and society that stops people. That's the thing that we should instead aspire to. We've had some really interesting comments, probably from some girls who climb trees, I think, which is good. So you like some of these. So, Paul, I've definitely suppressed my emotions when working in male-dominant teams within football, track and field, for example. Becoming one of the lads later in my career, I learned that this wasn't necessary. It takes time when you just want to fit. I'm like a chameleon when it comes to fitting in, and I'm a natural tomboy, so I didn't feel like I was drifting far. So that's interesting. So Paul felt like she naturally felt herself leaning into some of those things, but it felt comfortable to her decision, which is somewhat different to having to over-adapt, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I talk about maybe I over-adapted a little bit, but I do think that's in my real nature. And it was, again, I refer back to that first blog that I wrote where, you know, I remember having that conversation with my partner's daughter where we were talking about being non-binary, and I said, how do you identify? And she said, well, I'm quite happy. I'm a girl. I'm quite happy to be identified as such. But at the end of the day, I'm me. And that was, especially from a 15-year-old, was really profound for me, because I was like, you're right. And I think in the past, I've really struggled with that idea of being me, because I either have to be one of the lads or, but actually, and it's something I guess I've come to be more comfortable with as I've got older, but it's taken a long time. And often people do stereotype you in that, you know, I'm out on the mountain bikes with the lads, but I equally love to put a pair of heels on and dress up and put some makeup on and have my hair done. And for a long time, I really struggled to reconcile that. And what was interesting was a lot of the feedback I've had about the blog, one of the comments that people loved the most was this idea that I'm building my own box and I'm going to stand on it. I'm not going to be put in it. And that resonated with quite a lot of people. And because that's very much how I feel is this whole why be put in a box, you know, and we do it all too much. And so yeah, it's some of the feedback around that has really been quite interesting, but it's interesting.
I'll bring in another comment here from Daniel Chulan. Hi, Danielle, sorry. Where is it? Yeah, I agree, Liz. So much more than gender. I also don't like pigeonhole people personality types. She uses Myers-Briggs as an example. Yeah, we sort of talked about that, didn't we? If you go into personality, you can sometimes just end up with new boxes. Assessment of culture and the environment in inclusive leadership, rather than it being gender-specific bias. Also, acknowledging the pros and cons of different behaviours. It's very complex. And I think it's really good to analyse which behaviours yield the best outcomes specific to that circumstance. It's a really interesting point. Thanks, Danielle. I think what I wonder about on that is just to frame a question over how relevant is the context to which personality types or traits or styles might be better for which thing. Is that part of your analysis, really, that we need to be open to all and then be specific when we need to be?
Yeah, I think there are certain times when, you know, certain leadership styles, and I know Danielle and I have actually discussed this directly, but I think there are times when certain leadership styles, like, you know, when you're out on a battlefield, I've worked a lot with the military, and so there are times when you do need to implement certain management or leadership styles or personality styles, and I also think, but again, it's about respecting each other as human beings. And you know, when you look at a team that functions really well, you know, if you had a whole bunch of leaders, it's not going to function very well as a team, because you wouldn't get a lot done. You need the people who, you know, who do the kind of the leg work and the dog's body's work, and the people who are leading and coordinating. But it's about everybody having respect for everybody else. And what's been really interesting is I've gone back into an NHS role, and how being in pain management, you know, we have consultants, we have a nurse, we have advanced practice physios, we have our band 7 physios, and we're very much on an even keel around that. We all have our own specific skills, and we work very, very well as a team. And it was actually commented on from some musculoskeletal practitioners that, it's very non-hierarchical, and they struggle a little bit with that, coming from quite old-fashioned kind of NHS backgrounds, and we're quite bemused by the whole thing, because and I think that's key, is this whole idea of hierarchy, that one person is better than another, and actually we're all just people at the end of the day. And I think it's having that respect for different people and different roles. And this is what I said, I think, again, in one of my blogs, I said about how you know, I was taught very much to respect people and not hierarchy, and that's got me into trouble often over the years.
Well, you and me both. I think that's why I feel like that's exactly how we met. I have a funny thing, because I don't remember why, and I wonder if it might have been inspired by one of your blogs, perhaps. But me and Charlotte were talking about hierarchy last week for some reason, and we both came to realize that when we strip it back, it's not as much off. Neither of us have a massive problem with hierarchy as if a concept, but it's when it's unjust hierarchy, undeserved positionality within that hierarchy, whereby it's not that any influence or power that someone wields is not by merit, it's by time frame or by some sort of nepotism or equivalent corruption. It just feels like that unjustness, unfairness that we're sort of frustrated at, and so you end up wanting to sort of floor that where possible. I want to ask, on your blog, I know we've only got 5 minutes, I will bring in, we've got a couple of lovely comments coming in. Let's get to them first. Liz is a legend. And then we've got Johnny Trumbull saying, such a great conversation, amazing points. Thank you, Johnny, really appreciate you tuning in. I'll come to Joe Turner's made a comment there. I'll bring you in a second. But I can't let you leave without asking you on air, Liz, is that on one of your first blogs, you'd sort of mentioned that you'd had a bit of a wrestle with feminism, say, as a label for you, and certainly something I recall us talking about personally as well. What's that journey been like, and where do you find yourself with that, say, term or that ideology or that movement?
So I'm quite happy to call myself a feminist these days. I think I kind of used to see it as a bit of a man-hating thing, is a kind of bit of a leftist kind of a bit militant, and so I struggle with the idea, because I'm not a man hater. I've got, I'm very close to my dad and my brother, and lots of great men in my life and lots of great male friends. So and because I have always had a lot of male friends, I struggled with that idea, because feminism seemed to kind of pit us against them. But I think that's changing a lot. I think that the modern kind of idea behind it has changed, and I think it's about making peace with what it means, and it means equality, and equality isn't about us and them. It's about us all working together. It's about us all being on the same side. But it's just, we have had to fight a little bit harder, because it's not that long ago that we didn't have the vote, and women were, they didn't own anything. They didn't have a right to even their own children. They didn't have a right to, and that's, within fairly recent history. So the upshot of it is, there still is a difference there. We still are fighting for numerous different reasons.
Well, it was obviously rights-based in its primacy with regards to rights to vote, etc., rights to own property and the like. And then now it's about identity and sort of making sure that we sort of cross-mix culturally to share and understand and value different dispositions, which can include then stopping it being always a man's world. So it's fascinating, and the reason I ask that is because a lot of women close to me, I say a massive variation, to be honest, but certainly there's very few people you'd find these days, myself included, that would ever contend the notion as to why would anyone be against feminism, as if to suggest equality for men and women under the law, for example, or as in terms of basic rights. Then, yeah, it'd be fascinating to find someone that would push back against that. However, as soon as you've got a label or a movement, then you've got not just what it stands for, but its associated personnel, right? Its congregation matters. And so that's why I find that there are some women in my life, and many men as well, that would say that there's a big difference between a pursuit of equality across the sexes and what feminism means, be that now or in the past. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask that question of you, because I think you're amongst the people I've spoken to about this over the years, and it's been interesting to continue to watch your journey. Jo Turner has posted that she's loving the emergence of women leaders who are exercising a very female type of power. Jacinda, I assume she's meaning Jacinda Ardern being the most obvious. No weakness there, but definitely not trying to deny her biology. Is she sort of an emergent role model for you, Liz? You've been watching Jacinda Ardern?
Yeah, completely. And I've not under her rule, but I lived in New Zealand, and it's and I think, I became very aware of there's real differences over there in terms of gender roles and the way women are viewed. And I was quite impressed. It was very much, it's quite an equal society. She's very much a wrong. I just think I think leaders like that are amazing, because she's not trying to deny her biology. She's very much who she is. And you know, she's a great communicator, and she's really cares, and I think that comes across. So yeah, it definitely somebody who's up there.
Those sorts of role models do clearly work. I think what's funny is because I think one of the things that, admittedly, when I look on and think of Jacinda Ardern, particularly over the last 18 months, unfortunately, I think that some of the response to her work has sort of put me off. Not her, but I'm sick of the phoning. I'll be honest. I'm sick of her being brought up. Not in this context. Joe's totally appropriate here. But what I'm meaning is, I sense that I see some of the fandom around it, and her as an orator, and the charisma that she's exuding reminds me too much of Tony Blair, and he sucked me in. And so, admittedly, it's not her fault, but some people's phoning after her just for the sake of every utterance. That's starting to bother me somehow.
But again, isn't this the whole point? Is that we just go to extremes? It tends to be all one or the other, rather than saying, do you know what, Jacinda's great and she's doing X, Y, and Z, but I disagree with her here, and as physios, we're terrible sometimes at doing that, of this like all or nothing kind of idea of, and it doesn't have to be like that, you know. I think but it is just about. It's about respecting individuals and individual differences, and people get this, and this is the problem with the media these days, is that it gets whipped up into this kind of frenzy, and I think David Pulse has just said about, look at Finland for great political leaders, and I was watching something about the Finnish leader the other day, and they were pushing her to kind of say, oh, countries that are female-led have done better in the coronavirus. And she was saying, no, that's not the case. And again, it comes down to this, it's not just about male or female, it's about leadership style.
Tempting them into tribalism, weren't they? I've seen that.
And she was like, no, look at other countries. She named a few countries that these are led by men, and they've done equally as well, you know. So
I mean, there are plenty of classic examples of female leaders that then haven't. And this is what's funny about stereotypes, isn't it? Because you've got people that say, well, people would like to try and take low-hanging fruit and be socially right on and say, I prefer female leaders. It's all like Thatcher, Merkel, you know, where you start reeling off people that might not be associated strongly with their politics, and they start to get a bit twitchy. It's like, oh, no, not them. But then that's because the way in which they are sometimes, as a means of pushback, they're allowing themselves to indulge stereotypes too, and sometimes just using these things as being Trojan horses for their opinions, be that their politics or whatever else it might be. So it's fascinating, and this is something we're never going to cover enough of in half an hour. But I hope I've not put you off maybe coming back on the show in the new year.
No, definitely
I'm really
not.
Fascinated to watch your blog develop, and obviously we've got plans to catch up over a few jars soon, aren't we? We've not been able to catch up in too long, mate. So thank you so much. Tell people where they can find more about you, and obviously plug the link to the blog.
So it's girls who climb trees. So I think the website's girlswhoclimbtrees.co.uk. I'm on Instagram, which is Girls in Trees 1, and the same on Twitter. Or if you already follow me on Revolution Sports Physios Recover the Miles, I've kept that account because I've got lots of followers on there, so I didn't want to give those up. So I often will retweet the Girls Who Climb Trees. So if you can give the Girls Who Climb Trees an account a follow, that would be fantastic, and would love some feedback, positive or negative. Feel free to disagree, because this generates my thinking and it pushes me to kind of question my beliefs. So
absolutely. Well, that's what this is all about, isn't it? We're just trying to provoke conversation, sometimes plant a flag. We're never going to cover a topic as thoroughly as it deserves on this, but hopefully it generates conversation, which your blog is certainly doing. It's got my cogs turning, and it's just really nice to see you back on the scene and sharing your thoughts, mate.
Can I just say a quick hello to Dave Poulter, who we've been conversing on Twitter for quite some time now, and he's like my he's like my Twitter buddy. So, and he's just said first time great to see Liz in person. So hi, Dave.
First time he doesn't need a translator. Yes, for those that don't know, Dave shares mine and Liz's Lancastrian accent. So yeah, he'll be feeling right at home. So certainly. Thank you so much for those that have contributed live in the chat. And then please, most of you do tune in after the fact, so please do let us know what you think. Thanks for joining us. It's been a busy week, but it's been a really fun one. And certainly all the guests we've had on, you've been giving me lots of feedback and calling for them to come back on. And I imagine Liz is no different. So thanks a lot to all of you. And next week will be my last week of this year. I'm going to wrap things up from the 18th. Chewing It Over is going to have its final week next week of this season, let's say. And I'm gonna then be back in the new year. So send your submissions for what topics you want me to sort of summarize on, or any final guests you want me to scramble onto the show. But yeah, next week's gonna be our last one. But thanks, it's been a real win. So see you soon.